I had been living in the towers for what seemed like a lifetime, surrounded by the endless hum of technology and the persistent buzz of drones in the sky. The floating city was magnificent, almost unreal. Yet, beneath the polished surface, there was an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't shake off. One evening, during a routine inspection, I felt a sharp tremor run through the ground beneath my feet. It was subtle, but enough to stir something deep within me, like an instinctual warning. I brushed it off at first, attributing it to the usual machinery glitches. But the tremors didn't stop. They grew more frequent, and the air started to feel heavier, as if the entire structure of the city was holding its breath. I found myself gazing at the sky more often, the wide expanse of metal and clouds that stretched endlessly above. That's when I noticed the cracks. At first, they were just small, like fissures in the atmosphere itself, barely perceptible against the expanse of floating towers. But they grew slowly, then faster, until they seemed to spread like lightning through the fabric of the air. I saw cracks in the sky. "What is that?" I whispered to myself in a panic. The words felt foreign, even though they came from me. There was something inherently wrong, something fundamental about the way the world had shifted. I scrambled to find someone, anyone who might understand what was happening. I contacted the central hub, but they dismissed my concerns as technical anomalies, things that could be fixed with a patch or an update. But the cracks kept growing, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. It was then that I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew the tower's blueprints well. The infrastructure was designed with advanced AI and quantum technology, all programmed to optimize the city's stability. But these cracks, they didn't belong. Something had gone wrong at the core, something buried deep within the city's floating foundation. I slipped away from the prying eyes of the higher-ups and headed toward the engineering bay. The corridors were eerily quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath with me. When I arrived at the central engine room, I found it in a state of chaos. Engineers and technicians were scattered around, looking frantic, as if they too had just realized the severity of the situation. One of them, a colleague named Jonas, looked up in shock when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, clearly confused. "You should be in the safe zone, not here," but I couldn't retreat. Not when I knew something had to be done. I had to find the source of the issue before it was too late. I was led to a set of monitors showing live feeds of the city. The cracks, now fully visible, were spreading faster than anyone could comprehend. The city's AI, usually calm and composed, was glitching, showing distorted patterns and conflicting data. The core's destabilizing. Jonas muttered under his breath, his face pale. "It's not supposed to be like this." I nodded grimly, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The city, this marvel of engineering, was on the brink of collapse. And nobody seemed to notice until it was too late. The more I studied the data, the more I realized the cracks were a manifestation of something much worse. They weren't just physical flaws. They were symptoms of a deeper problem of corruption within the system itself. A corrupted algorithm, a malfunctioning AI, or worse, something far more sinister. But what? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had sabotaged the city's core infrastructure. The more I thought about it, the more I suspected the corporation that controlled the towers. They were the only ones with the resources and motivation to carry out such a covert operation. I ran the diagnostics over and over again, trying to pinpoint the exact cause of the destabilization. Every result led to a dead end. The AI was operating perfectly, at least. That's what the system was telling me. But I knew better. It didn't feel right. And the longer I spent here, the more unsettled I became. The cracks in the sky seemed to grow larger by the second, as if the heavens themselves were tearing apart. I had to act fast, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. As I reached out to a few trusted colleagues, one of them, Clara, responded with urgency. She had been working on a classified project for the corporation, something to do with the city's new energy source. She didn't go into details, but her tone was enough to tell me something was wrong. She arrived at the engine room, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're right," she said quietly. "The cracks are real, but they're not just physical. They're connected to something much bigger. Something dangerous." I could sense the fear in her voice, and it only deepened my suspicion. Clara revealed something that shook me to my core. The corporation had been testing a new form of energy, something designed to stabilize the floating towers indefinitely. But the experiment had gone horribly wrong. The energy source had created an unstable feedback loop, destabilizing the city's core. The cracks in the sky weren't just an anomaly. They were the visible effect of the city's failing energy infrastructure. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. How could they have kept this from the public? How many lives had been put at risk for corporate greed? "They'll never admit it," Clara whispered, her eyes darting nervously. "If we go public, they'll shut us down before we can even speak. They'll say we're crazy, that we're imagining things." I clenched my fists in frustration. The corruption ran deeper than I had imagined, and I knew we were up against more than just a failing city. We were up against a powerful corporation willing to do anything to protect its secrets. But I couldn't let that stop me. Lives were at stake, and I couldn't allow this to continue. We quickly made a plan to gather the evidence we needed to expose the corporation's role in the city's imminent collapse. It wasn't easy. Security was tight, and we had to stay under the radar to avoid being caught. Every move we made felt like a step closer to disaster. But as we dug deeper, the truth became undeniable. The corporation had been hiding the extent of the damage for years, manipulating the city's AI to cover up the flaw. The cracks weren't just a glitch. They were a warning. A warning that the city's end was coming. I couldn't help but think of the people living in the towers. The families, the children, the workers who had no idea of the impending doom. We were running out of time. I felt the pressure mounting as we worked tirelessly, trying to extract the data we needed. But the deeper we went, the more dangerous things became. The corporation's influence stretched far, and anyone who posed a threat was swiftly dealt with. I had no illusions about what was at stake. If we failed, we would be silenced. But I couldn't back down. As we approached the final stage of our mission, I began to feel a strange sense of déjà vu, as if I had been here before, in another life. The cracks in the sky seemed closer now, the air thicker, and the hum of the city's machinery more pronounced. I couldn't shake the feeling that the city was watching us, that the very foundation of it all was aware of our every move. Was this just a dream? Or was this the reality I had unwittingly stumbled into? The line between the two was becoming more blurred by the second. The final confrontation came sooner than I expected. As we tried to upload the evidence to the central database, the security system detected our breach. Alarms blared, and the entire facility went into lockdown. I had never been more terrified in my life. We had no choice but to run. But even as I fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cracks in the sky were closing in on us. The very air around me seemed to vibrate with impending doom. Time was running out. The city was on the verge of collapsing, and I was no closer to stopping it. As I stood on the edge of the tower, staring at the chasm that was slowly opening up in the sky, I realized that the fate of the city, and perhaps humanity itself, was in my hands. The cracks were no longer just a symbol of destruction. They were the doorway to something far greater, something I couldn't yet understand. But I would fight to the end to uncover the truth. Whatever it took, we were on the run. The corporation's agents were hot on our trail, and every step we took seemed to bring us closer to being caught. The air felt oppressive, thick with the weight of the city's imminent collapse. I could feel the ground trembling beneath my feet, each tremor a reminder that time was running out. The cracks in the sky were no longer just an anomaly. They were a countdown, a clock ticking down to the city's destruction. I had to keep moving, had to find a way to fix this before it was too late. Clara and I took refuge in the lower levels of the city, a forgotten area rarely visited by anyone except maintenance crews. The walls were damp and covered in layers of dust, and the faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance. It was here that I began to piece together the full scope of the disaster. The corporation had known about the flaw in the system for years, but they had kept it hidden, prioritizing profit over the safety of the people living in the towers. They had gambled with their lives, and now the whole city was paying the price. As we huddled in the dimly lit room, Clara pulled up the data we had managed to extract from the corporation's systems. The files were heavily encrypted, but with my expertise, we were able to decipher them. What we found made my blood run cold. The cracks in the sky weren't just the result of a failing energy source. They were the result of an experiment gone horribly wrong, an attempt to manipulate the very fabric of reality itself. The corporation had been testing a new form of energy that, when destabilized, had started tearing apart the very atmosphere. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The experiment had used quantum technology to generate an artificial energy field, one that could theoretically stabilize the floating city indefinitely. But something had gone wrong. The energy field had created an unstable feedback loop, causing the atmospheric cracks that were now spreading across the sky. The corporation had covered it up, making the public believe that everything was fine while secretly they were preparing for the worst. They had underestimated the power of their own creation, and now they were trying to contain it at all costs. Clara's face was pale as she read over the data. This is beyond anything we could have imagined, she whispered. If the cracks continue to spread, the city will collapse. And worse, the energy field could tear apart the very fabric of reality. Everything, people, buildings, the sky itself will be destroyed. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. We were running out of time, and we were running out of options. The only way to stop the collapse was to shut down the energy source completely. But how could we do that without triggering a catastrophic chain reaction? We need to find the core, I said, my voice filled with determination. If we can destroy the energy source at the heart of the city, we can stop the collapse. It's the only way, Clara nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We both knew the risks. The core was heavily guarded, and we had no idea how to disable it without triggering the energy field's catastrophic collapse. But there was no other choice. We had to try, or else the entire city, everyone we knew, would be lost. We gathered our things and set out toward the core, navigating the winding, abandoned corridors of the lower levels. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional clatter of debris as we moved forward. It felt like we were walking through a tomb, the echoes of a forgotten world surrounding us. Every step I took seemed to reverberate through the city, as if it were aware of our presence. The closer we got to the core, the more I felt the weight of the city's fate pressing down on me. I could feel the cracks in the sky growing closer, their cold emptiness reaching for us. When we finally reached the central chamber, I felt a sense of dread settle in my chest. The room was enormous, filled with complex machinery and glowing screens that hummed with unnatural energy. The core itself was located at the center, a massive structure of metal and crystal that pulsed with a strange, almost hypnotic light. As we approached, I could feel the air shift, the atmosphere growing heavier with each passing second. It was as if the entire room was alive, reacting to our presence. And then I saw at the cracks in the sky reflected in the shimmering surface of the core. "This is it," I whispered, staring at the energy field that surrounded the core. It was beautiful in its complexity, a swirling mass of light and energy, but it was also dangerously unstable. I could see the pattern of the cracks reflecting in the core's energy field, as if they were being fed by it. The core wasn't just a power source. It was the very heart of the problem. If we didn't shut it down now, everything would be lost. But how could we disable it without causing an even greater disaster? Clara stepped forward, her face determined. "We don't have much time," she said. "We need to destabilize the core's energy field. If we can break the feedback loop, we might be able to stop the cracks from spreading." I nodded, but the task seemed impossible. The core was too powerful, too complex. We didn't have the tools, and the risk of failure was too great. But Clara was right. We had no other choice. We had to try. As I began to work on the control panel, I could feel the energy in the room shifting, reacting to my presence. The core's hum grew louder, the vibrations in the air more pronounced. I focused, pushing aside the fear that gnawed at my insides. I knew that every second counted. If we didn't get this right, it would all be over. The cracks in the sky were almost above us now, and I could feel the ground trembling beneath my feet as the city itself seemed to shift and groan under the strain of the collapsing energy field. My fingers flew over the control panel, trying to bypass the security protocols and access the core's main functions. It was a delicate process, one that required precision and control. I could feel the sweat running down my brow as the pressure mounted. Clara stood by, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. We both knew that the moment we triggered the wrong sequence, the entire city would come crashing down. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. The fate of everyone in the towers was in my hands. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to override the core's defenses. The feedback loop was beginning to destabilize, the energy field flickering in response. It wasn't enough to shut it down completely, but it was a start. I could see the cracks in the sky slow, their spread diminishing slightly. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. We might be able to save the city after all. But as I turned to Clara, I saw the look in her eyes, a mix of relief and fear. "It's working," I said, a sense of triumph rising within me. But Clara shook her head, her expression grim. "It's not over yet," she replied. "We've destabilized the field, but we need to sever the connection completely. If we don't, it will rebuild itself and start all over again." My heart sank as I realized the truth. We weren't out of danger yet. In fact, we were closer to the end than ever before. The energy source was still alive, and unless we found a way to completely sever it from the system, the cracks would return. The weight of the situation settled in as I looked at the core. I had never felt so powerless, so small in the face of something so vast and uncontrollable. But I couldn't give up now, not when we were so close. "We need to disconnect the energy field entirely," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overtake me. Clara nodded, and we began working frantically to access the system's most critical functions. Every second brought us closer to the unknown, but there was no turning back now. The final stage of the operation was the most dangerous. I had to manually cut the connection between the core and the city's power grid, a delicate process that could trigger an overload if done incorrectly. The air in the room seemed to pulse with the energy of the core, the cracks in the sky growing more pronounced with each passing second. I reached for the final control, my hands trembling. The fate of the entire city was in my hands. I pressed the button, holding my breath as the core's energy began to unravel. The moment the connection was severed, the world seemed to hold its breath. The energy field flickered, then collapsed in on itself, sending a shockwave through the room. I braced myself, But it wasn't enough to prepare me for the impact. The core began to glow brighter than ever before, and the cracks in the sky, once distant, now seemed to swirl around us, closing in with terrifying speed. I realized then that we hadn't just stopped the collapse, we had triggered something much worse. The end was inevitable now. The room around me seemed to disintegrate as the shockwave tore through the city. The cracks in the sky were no longer just above us. They were all around us, engulfing everything in their path. I tried to scream, but the sound was lost in the deafening roar. Everything was coming apart. The towers, the city, the very sky itself, it was all crumbling. As the light from the core's final explosion engulfed me, I realized that I had failed. The city was lost, and with it, everything we had fought to protect. In the aftermath of the explosion, everything went dark. For what felt like an eternity, I was suspended in nothingness. The familiar hum of the city, the warmth of the towers, everything was gone. It was as if the world had unraveled, leaving only emptiness behind. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had we succeeded? Had we failed? I couldn't tell. But then, slowly, a faint light appeared in the distance, and I felt myself being pulled toward it. I had no choice but to follow. As I moved toward the light, a strange calm washed over me. The turbulence of the world collapsing, the chaos of the explosion, seemed distant now. It was as if I was drifting through space, untethered from everything I had once known. The light grew brighter, and I could feel the weight of time itself pressing on me. The cracks in the sky, the core's energy, the city, it all seemed like a distant memory, a fleeting dream that was slipping through my fingers. Yet, the more I focused, the clearer the image became. The light turned into a vast expanse, a horizon stretching out before me. It wasn't the city I had known, but something else, something more. The world around me was vast, infinite, and I could see shapes and forms in the distance, flickering like stars. There were no structures, no towers, no remnants of the floating city. Instead, it was as if I had been transported to a new realm, a place beyond the fabric of the world I had once inhabited. The air was cool, and the atmosphere was charged with an energy I couldn't comprehend. As I floated through this strange expanse, I saw other figures in the distance. They were like shadows, indistinct, but somehow familiar. I couldn't make out their faces, but I knew they were people I had once known, people from the city, perhaps even the ones I had fought to save. They were all moving in the same direction, toward something I couldn't yet see. I followed, unable to stop myself, drawn to the pull of this new world. The cracks in the sky, the city's fall, it all felt like a distant dream now. But why was I here? The figures began to gather, and I saw a bright light at the center, a source of energy that seemed to call to me. As I drew closer, the light became more intense, and I could feel the power radiating from it. It was like the heart of the universe, the source of all things. I knew that if I approached it, everything would change. The light beckoned me, and though I was filled with uncertainty, I couldn't resist. I moved closer, drawn by the gravitational pull of this unknown force. When I reached the light, everything stopped. The world, the figures, the expanse, everything went still. There was no sound, no movement, just pure and filtered energy. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something. The light before me pulsed in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I reached out, hesitant but compelled. The moment my fingers touched the light, a wave of energy surged through me, filling me with sensations beyond description, warmth, cold, weightlessness, and gravity all at once. In that instant, everything I had ever known seemed to converge. The cracks in the sky, the collapse of the city, the experiment, And even my dream, it was all part of something greater, something I couldn't understand. My mind flooded with images, fractured pieces of the world I had known, glimpses of people, places, and moments that had once seemed so real. They all flashed before me, intertwining with the light, until they became one. The light wasn't just a source of energy, it was a conduit, a bridge between realities, between life and death. And then I understood. The collapse wasn't an end. It was a transition. The city's fall had been the beginning of something new, something beyond the physical realm. I had thought we were fighting to save the city, to stop the cracks in the sky. But we had been fighting to preserve a reality that was already doomed. The collapse was necessary. It was the gateway to the next phase, a transformation that none of us had been prepared for. The city had been a shell, a temporary construct. What came next would be something beyond our comprehension. I felt my consciousness expand, stretching beyond the boundaries of the body I once inhabited. The figures around me began to dissolve, their forms merging with the light, becoming part of the whole. The past, the present, and the future all existed simultaneously in this new space. It was as if time itself had been broken, no longer linear, but a swirling mass of possibilities. I saw the city, its destruction, its people, its energy all merge into one grand cosmic dance. Everything was connected, and everything had a purpose, even if that purpose was beyond understanding. The more I absorbed, the more I realized how small my perception of the world had been. I had been trapped in a finite existence, clinging to the belief that the city, the towers, were the only reality. But now, I saw the truth. The universe was vast, and life was but a fleeting moment in the grand design. The energy I felt coursing through me wasn't just a product of the city's core, it was a force that transcended worlds. It had always been there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who could understand its nature. Slowly, the light began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back, away from the vast expanse, back toward the broken world I had left behind. The transition was jarring, like waking from a dream. I was no longer in the realm of energy and light. Instead, I was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down at the ruins of the city. The cracks in the sky were gone, replaced by a calm, clear horizon. It was as if the collapse had never happened. But deep inside, I knew better. The world I had known was gone. The towers, the people, the city, it was all reduced to dust, a memory. But in its place, there was something new, something that had been waiting to emerge. It was as if the collapse had reset everything, creating space for a new beginning. I stood there, watching the remnants of the world fade away, and I realized that I had been part of something much larger than myself. The cracks in the sky had been the beginning, but the end wasn't the end. It was the start of something beyond comprehension. As I stood on the precipice, looking out into the unknown, I knew my journey wasn't over. The energy, the light, the transformation, it was just the beginning of something much bigger. My role had been to witness, to understand, and to let go of the past. The city had fallen, but the future was open. I had seen the cracks in the sky, and now I saw the endless possibilities that lay beyond them. The universe was vast, and I was just a small part of its infinite story. And so, I stepped forward, not knowing what awaited me, but understanding that the journey had just begun. The cracks in the sky had led me here, and now the horizon stretched out before me, offering new paths, new worlds, and new possibilities. The past was gone, and the future was waiting. I had seen the end, but now I was ready for whatever came next. With each step, I knew that I was no longer just a witness to the collapse. I was part of the unfolding story of the universe itself. The light faded completely, leaving me standing in the vast, empty space between worlds. And I felt, for the first time, truly free.